Main thing I can remember about World War II, of course, my brother went off and joined the Army, the last stages of it. He was too young before that. He had just gotten through basic training and was in the Army and would have gone had we invaded Japan. He probably would have been in on that. But as it happened, as you know, they dropped the bomb, and so he went in the Army of Occupation. But otherwise, we were here, and the main thing I remember, the blackouts on Pauley's Island. We still went over on Pauley's in the summer. And you had to, of course, pull these black curtains down, no lights showing over there. And the local, at that time they had Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, and they used to have, keep an eye out on these beaches. They were afraid of German subs sending raiding parties. And I can remember as a child, one day, these soldiers coming down from the Myrtle Beach Air Base, one sat in what we call our lookout, right where we were living. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I've just sent here to look." I think they'd gotten the report of perhaps some German sub landing people, and that's the main thing I remember. And then they would have these people, supposedly, watching for airplanes. Well, you know, good job we did all that. It's a good thing the Germans really didn't think we were worth attending to. But the submarine threat was probably the main thing on these long stretches of beaches, you know, where they were afraid that they would infiltrate and land somebody in saboteurs and that sort of thing. But I really don't know of any example of it. I think they were always scared of it. But I do remember the blackouts. And then the rationing, of course. We were luckier than people in the cities in as much as we could grow things here. And we had, you know, beef, pork. Whereas in the cities, they didn't have any of this sort of thing. Only thing we had to buy would be coffee, sugar, that sort of thing. And I remember the rationing, you know, no clothes, of course, particularly. And that strikes what I call the modern generation as so strange. They have no idea what it is, my daughter doesn't, and those younger, of what it was to have that period where you just didn't get anything, you know, unless you had those little ration books and that sort of thing. This act of terror on September the 11th has done more to shake up, I guess you would say, the generation since then. You realize we've not had anything happen that we've had to face up to like that. But it really didn't affect us too much here in the country. Now in the cities, may have Charleston would have been on the alert even more, what with the naval base there. But they didn't really run into any great problems. So it didn't really feel it too much, except that people were off in the Army, Air Force, Navy.
Well, World War II, that's when my husband was in the service, okay, of course, in the Coast Guard. But then they were situated right there on Front Street where, you know, where Wayne's Sporting Goods, right behind there was there. And he got transferred to California. And of course I went out there, but I couldn't take it. I had to come back to South Carolina. And it made it hard, but I stayed a while. I think I stayed about 9 months and then came on back home. Yeah. And waited until, with a lot of help from a lot of people, he got transferred back to Charleston, which made it nice.
My father was in World War II. Okay. He was in the Navy. Okay. Mm-hmm. But my mom talks about it. Okay. Yeah, she talks about when he went into the Navy, and in them days they didn't have monies to get places to live, and at that time I think she was living with my dad's parents. But then when my father went into the Navy, then she moved in with her mom. And she had me as a baby, and then she had another. I was a baby, and then she was pregnant with my other sister. Mm-hmm. And then she talks about that and how things were. And she always bragged about, I kept myself. I didn't have no boyfriend when he was gone. I was a distant woman.
It was very sad then, but we were happy in our own way. I mean, God rest Annie's soul, we paid her $2 a week. We paid the laundry lady $1 a week, and we hardly earned it. Salaries were so low then, but we all enjoyed it. We would go make the best of it, you know. And all I can say is we survived. I don't know how else to describe it because it's too depressing to go into those times. In a way, I wish these children today knew just a little bit about it, because they can't ever get enough. And why can't I have it? And, you know, everything's taken so for granted. Now, that's the only thing that I can truthfully say. They would be, I think, more appreciative. And maybe there wouldn't be so many divorces either. We had a USO. I used to go and play for all the soldiers. Then we would have them here for dinner. I couldn't sleep. We couldn't sleep anybody because we didn't have room. But we'd put up card tables and fed them. Oh, yes, yes. And all the wonderful thank you letters we received from the parents. At those times, you know, the windows were all open, and my husband, his name was Julius, and Roz and myself would be sitting here and just having more fun, and people would walk by and they'd say, oh my God, they're having another party. We would play the piano and people would walk by and they would stop and listen to us, and then we'd really show off, you know.
When I was growing up and throughout my years before I went to New York, I thought there wasn't a place in the world that was worse in terms of race relations and adult-children relationships. And but when I came back, I mean, before I went to New York, they were communities, streets in Georgetown where whites and black lived next to each other. The problem in the South, in Georgetown, was not different communities. It was different, I don't know, different beliefs or something. Because my mother and the white families next door or whatever, they would, do you have a cup of sugar you could lend me till my husband get paid or whatever? They would, over the fence, they would change things. But then at night, or socially, they never. Schools have changed. A number of us had moved to New York by the time schools got integrated in Georgetown. So one of the persons who moved to New York, she used to get the Georgetown Times. So it says the schools were integrated. We couldn't believe it. She read it, she mailed it to somebody else. I got it in the mail from somebody that I read it, I sent it. That thing went all over New York. We could not believe that schools were integrated. And there was no marching, no protest, no anything, right? We couldn't believe it. So things were changing in a way that, because I had been on a project in Louisiana where they put the dogs on you and all that. Nothing like that had happened in Georgetown. Things were changing, and for whatever reason, it was good because it got people together, you know, so people know and can accept differences without feeling that differences is bad. It's not bad, it's just different, that's all.
Merle's, isn't it? As I think, in a certain way, Merleton has always been a rather unique community, and it's been good. That I think the creek, the salt creeks, and the ocean made all the difference in the early days, because the whole community, most everybody made part of their living out of what they could gather from whether it was clams and oysters, crabs, or fish. The community, black and white, a lot of their earning was what they could gather in the way of seafood and sell and eat. Mama used to say nobody had to go hungry in Merle's End if they were able-bodied, because collards will grow year-round, and you could always, with the Walkmore River on one side and the Salt Creeks on the other, there was food. But I think that had a strong influence on the way that people have lived here in this community, because when people work together, they know each other in a different way. And then following that period, in the 40s, the restaurants began to build, and that caused the same situation. The kitchens were always full of local people, black and white. So I think in reference to that and other things about a small community, this has been a good community to grow up in. I remember when, it was just, there were only a couple of places that Mama called off limits for me. I mean, you could walk from one end of the end to the other to see a friend after school, and there was no fear about a child doing that. There's so much that we've lost, and that parents these days can't have that secure and safe feeling about their children. We had a little rowboat Mama got on my 12th birthday, and I don't remember doing anything all summer long but gathering seafood one way or the other, and then at high tide, swimming all of high tide. We looked like a bunch of little Indians by the end of the summer, but I remember Mama would sometimes pull my brother's little pants down when a friend came to see us because their little behinds were still white. I look back on the past. When I was growing up, there was not a building on all of that strip of beach out yonder, and there never should have been a building on it because it was a flat. It had high sand dunes before they built on top of the dunes, but I mean, it was just a narrow, very narrow peninsula. My grandfather came down here in 1906 or 10, 6 or I think, and he bought land from the river to the ocean, which included about a mile of that beach out there. Now, if only, Grandpapa told me he paid an extra $300 for the strip of beach because his original deed read bordered on the east by the Atlantic Ocean, but he wanted to be sure it included that strip of beach, so he got an extra deed for another $300. If only some leaders in our area here had seen the possibility of keeping that as a public beach. I mean, Grandpapa paid $300. He would have said nothing but a fool would ever put a house on it. He died in 42 or 44, I think. Anyway, I mean, when he died, it was just a beautiful, beautiful stretch of sand dunes and ocean. And it was Merle's in its waterfront. There was never any deal made about who owned it, It was just there for us to, as Merle's in its front by the ocean. But I look at Georgetown County, not just Georgetown County, it's true all over the world, all over the United States, but I think often I'll look at something like that and think if only someone had had the vision to ask Grandpapa, would you sell it to the county, would you give it to the county or the state? And he would have, had he been approached, I'm pretty sure, in other words, I know he told me no fool would ever put a house out there. So therefore, he would have considered that it should be kept wild. He told me he thought it was worth paying $300 for to hunt foxes on. So now I look at the county and look at what's gone, and I'm just hoping and praying for people who are caring more about the future of our area and the people who are coming along to live here than they care about politics and power.
I recall when they paved, I'd heard my parents say they had to pay a paving assessment, and they paid to have the sidewalk and the street paved. As I said, we used to make, sand houses and so forth. But the streets were so much better because they were paved, and traffic flowed through much better, and it just looked better.
We have to change. I appreciate that. But I think there's a certain fabric that runs through it that's still there. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that so many people have not left. I mean, that you do have families that go back and businesses that go back. And that's not just Georgetown, I'm sure. I think much more so in the South. I was looking at the census records for the 1920 census, I believe it was, not too long ago. And it was amazing how many people in the census had been born in the county. I mean, just rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows as you went through the thing. And then there would be somebody else that had been born someplace else. But just basically speaking, everybody who lived here was born here. And of course, now that's changed. The biggest change, I suppose, was when the paper mill came. And we did get a huge influx of people. I say huge was huge compared to, I think they had been in population. I'm guessing it was something like 5,000 people or something, and they brought in, I don't know, several thousand. I'm guessing at that too, but of course I was 7 years old, 8 years old at the time, and I just remember all these new people and so forth and so on. But most of them were from Arkansas and Louisiana and Mississippi, because that's where they had the other mills, and so you didn't have quite the change that you had when the steel mill came. And that came in 1968, I believe it was 68 or 69. And they brought in just a whole different set of people for the simple reason that they were doing something totally foreign as far as the manufacturing process. I mean, they're making steel. We'd never had any steel made in Georgetown County, for heaven's sake. But we'd always had the paper, we'd always had lumber and things of that sort. We were using the land, but so, and not a lot of them, but a number of them, well, not a lot of them, but a number of them were from Germany. And of course that was something new to our area. And then a lot of them had lived in very urban areas. And two things that I particularly remember or noticed is the fact that before that time, nobody went out to lunch. You just didn't eat out. And all these people were used to eating out. We had Thomas's Cafe downtown and maybe another cafe someplace, but I mean, everybody went home. I mean, the paper mill closed down from 12 to 1, so everybody left, went home and ate lunch and came back. So that was one big change, and of course you began to get restaurants and so forth. And the other thing was, they demanded the different produce in the grocery stores. I'd never seen fresh mushrooms before, and I had never seen fresh spinach. All the spinach I'd ever seen was canned. I mean, I guess we could grow it. But, and these other things, of course, then you notice in this too now, when you have an influx of the Mexican people into our area, which we do, out here at the grocery stores, they're bringing in things that we've never had access to. And of course, that's, it's very broadening in many ways. It's interesting and lets you know that there are other things out there as well.
Now, I know there's been quite a bit of building in the city, improvement of the structures, improvement of the streets down on Front Street. You heard about our streetscape, revitalization, Front Street especially. But those people who live on the West End are always complaining about how they are left out of the distribution of funds and the improvement of the city. But we were talking about this the other day at the Democratic Party. Education is one of the keys that are needed in this community for the average citizen. But at the same time, and I don't know how people who are not, I'll say in the system, get in the system. It's easy, it seems for me, but for those people who've never done, because somebody was saying when we're talking about people don't see candidates until it's time to vote. And they will tell you, well, why should I go out and vote? This isn't going to do a thing for me, you know. And that's the way they see it, because they don't see any improvement in their daily lives. But I try to get them to see, whether you see it or not, every decision that's made in this country is a legal or legislative decision that affects you. And we were saying the other day, I said, now I know we're going to have to do some education this year because we're going to have new voter machines with the electronic machines. But before we even talk about using the machine, we need to teach what are my responsibilities as a citizen.
Georgetown, like the whole of the South, has transformed. Physically, it has changed. Spiritually, I don't think it has changed. I think there was always a fine, deep feeling of goodwill. And it has just moved to into another phase and kind of expression. One of the things that I was most impressed with when I came back is the large number of young women who are in responsible positions in Georgetown with that same quiet dignity that I referred to, that is a part of the people of this town. Oh, and when I look at them, I'm just as proud as I can be.
I remember back when we had dirt roads on Front Street. And I remember back there when my daddy was in business, people would come from town with their wagon to shop, and they would park behind the store. And they'd go on uptown and finish what they had to do or whatever had to be done, and then go on back home. And I had a lot of friends, and they were also in business across the street too. We'd run across the street and talk to each other. One was in the flower business, one was in the shoe business, or just a little bit of everything. But I mean, oh, Georgetown, there's no but you couldn't imagine what it was back there compared to what it is now. But everybody took a lot of interest in what they were doing, and everybody helped one another. You know what I mean? There wasn't any throat cutting or things like that. Everybody was everybody's friend.
It's progressed, and the whole countryside has, for that matter, you know, opinions as well as commercially and materially. But I think Georgetown's remarkably the same. It's remarkable, you know, the flavor of the town, I think, is about the same as it used to be. It's an inviting place to live. I think some publication last year listed Georgetown, am I right on this, as one of the 50 best possibilities or living areas for people to settle in. You have that small town feel, and it's friendly, I think, and yet you have all these things available to you. You can go to Charleston for all these cultural things. You can come over to the beach. But I think it's very nice, and I have lifelong friends there, and we get together. And I don't think it has changed for the worse at all. I think it's been remarkable. Now this area here, oh my goodness, this has changed. Oh, I can remember when everything was a dirt road and Highway 17 came through. And when I was really a small child, I can remember vaguely when they even created Highway 17 through it. And as you know, Myrtle Beach has just grown like crazy. And we have had just tons of people who've come in and settled from all over the eastern part of the United States. So I guess you would say maybe this part's changed more than Georgetown has. And all these plantations have been carved up, as you can see, into golf courses and residential housing. And so it has lost a good bit of that old flavor. You have places like Arcadia and Hobcob Barony, you know, that are still intact, but not many. Now the ones on the PD in the Black River and Santee are, because they don't have the pressure, being close to the ocean, therefore influenced by all this. But I think Georgetown is remarkably the same and pleasantly so to me.
This revitalization of Front Street in itself speaks for itself. It's just absolutely gorgeous. not any question about it. Of course, now the one and only thing that, but it comes with progress, is the fact that we have so many transplants. And I certainly don't have any objections to it. The only objection I have is I love to go to parties and go to a lot of parties. But I used to know everybody. Now I go and, you know, now that to me is just about the biggest change that I can say. Other than, of course, all of these condominiums on Front Street now, restaurants on Front Street now, and but that's showbiz.
I am right now supposed to be doing the final editing on a young man from Chattanooga, and I've been working for about 10 years, and about probably 5 years ago we took another, a friend of his in to work with us with some of the editing, so that we're 3 of us now. But what we've done is collect all the work that my mother turned into the Library of Congress in the 30s. Some of it's on the internet, but very little compared to what she recorded. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this woman, Ida Wooten, who took photographs of some of the people, we have access to those photographs now. For years we couldn't find what had happened to them, but we did. So the University of South Carolina has accepted that for publication. And they accepted it a year ago in August, but we just haven't gotten our final work done. And I think Kincaid was here Thanksgiving, and we agreed we'd get it into the university before Christmas with my deadlines. But anyway, it'll be called, we think, Some of These Days, with a long, which we haven't worked out, you know, subtitle or whatever. I mean, in other words, in reference to the Writers Project folklore and stuff. I don't know, we haven't gone, but the Some of These Days, of course, is a quote from someone, and I'm sure that Some of These Days was referring to emancipation and freedom. I don't know how Mama did this, because with no tape recorder, but with a pencil, she recorded the words of so many spirituals in the churches, and sometimes there are probably maybe 4 or 5 versions of one, depending on which church she was in. But the problem at this point is that we have more material than can go in one book.
They started offering courses, and I was asked to teach a course in the history of the Negro in Georgetown County. And my reply was that I would be glad to if David Drayton would team teach with me. Now, David Drayton had been the last Negro principal of the Howard High School here. And after retirement, he had become very active with the Committee for the Preservation of Negro History. And they had done research and had established a museum. So he was the person who was really working at preserving the history of the Negro in Georgetown County. And they said yes, and I asked him if he would, and he said yes. And we taught that course there 3 or 4 years. And then later, we taught it at Artworks with Linda Ketron, and that's where we have most recently offered it. But that has been very exciting.
Dennis Lawson with the Race Museum was the first director of the Race Museum, and they had just written, Dr. Rogers had just written his book, Georgetown County History, so Dennis taught a Georgetown County history course from the book, which I took, because even living here, you don't have it under one cover or collected or one thing and another. So I taught. So
he taught it, and I took it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and recognized lots of possibilities with Georgetown, and lots of things that I certainly hadn't known, and so forth. So we're very indebted to Dr. Rogers. So when Dennis took the job, I think he went with, I think he went to Charleston with Drayton Hall, I believe is where he went from here. I'm not sure, one of them. Anyway, so there wasn't anybody to teach it. And so I just took it upon myself to teach it.
My husband's family was from Newport, Rhode Island, and they came to Georgetown in 1848 in the mercantile business, trading, and apparently, I can't find out a whole lot about it, and I don't know what the family has. He stayed here during the war, and after the war, he bought the house in 1876 from Mrs. Reed, who was a descendant of Mary Mann, who we've always said built the house, but as I was telling you earlier, I think that the house must have been here when she purchased it because of the large price that she paid for it. But it wouldn't be much older than about 1772. Everything that was put here to begin with is still here. It's only been added to, really. I mean, nothing has changed as far as the basic plan of the house, everything. And it's only been owned by the two families as far as we know, and that apparently, and it's been lived in by the Hazard family and then the Doyles since 1876, and I think that's very important for a house to keep it up and so forth. And it's a wonderful house to live in. It really, truly is. You've got lots of room and all this, so it's very nice.
My father had died in 1968, and my mother and one of my father's surviving sisters lived in the little summer cottage right next to my brother on the creek behind the hammock shop. And so the house went down, 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 and my aunt would come over every day with her companion and servant, and they would piddle around, but at least it kept the house open. Finally, she died in my father died in 1968, and my aunt in 1977. And then it really became crucial. The house was locked up, and people would break into it with crowbars. They'd come in boats or cars, and they would just pry open the locks and steal, and it became a question of do something with it or it's going to fall down. And my husband was not at all enthused, not at all. And I talked him into it and had to talk this contractor, August Franchini, who's still alive, who had done some restoration work for my father, and to doing something with the house. And he came over, he's a German in spite of that Italian name, and he had this thick accent. And he said, "What do you want to do this for?" And I said, "Well, what would you do if you'd inherited this house? Would you let it fall down, which is what it's doing? Or would you fix it up, or would you tear it down?" Well, being a contractor, he couldn't say anything but fix it up. I said, "Well, you do it." And he did. And so that's how it all came to be. And then once doing that, you had to come live in it, or people would tear it up again. And so that's when I stopped teaching after 10 years, and we moved up here. And then he died 1995, January of 1995. And so I'm here, and I have people saying, "What are you doing in that big old house all by yourself?" And I said, "I'm going to stay here all by myself." And I said, "I will have to be taken out of it kicking and screaming, and I'll have Alzheimer's, not a brain in my head, but I'm going to stay here until then." And I said, "It suits me fine. I wouldn't think of leaving it."